It comes and goes. We're out here
Hello,
chasing a
everyone. Welcome to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. This is your host, Tara Martini, along with the lovely Becky McNatten. We are glad to have you listening as we live and share stories of mental health.
Okay, we did a show a few weeks ago, Tara.
We did.
Where we discussed gender differences in mental health. And it's had me thinking since then about gender experiences with mental health, particularly the experiences for men. Over 6 million men in the United States experience depression every year. I did not know that. 6 million
I
men.
didn't either.
And many of these men will go untreated and undiagnosed because men are less likely to reach out, less likely to voice their experience. And guess what? Less likely to be diagnosed with depression as a result.
Which is such a sad
fact. And about 1 in every 10 men struggles with depression. That's a lot. And poignant for me because, and I'm sure poignant for you, I know several men and have many men close in my life who have or currently are experiencing depression. And I think it's a conversation that clearly society is not having sufficiently based on all of these statistics.
Right.
I don't think we're talking about men and depression with the same commonality as it actually is experienced out there. So we have a very special guest on our show today who I've been super excited to have on. Welcome, Mark Meyer.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We are so glad to have you on to talk about men's mental health and particularly this experience of depression. Before we get started, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, let's see. My name is Mark Meyer, and I've been a clinical social worker. I got my master's degree back in 1994, so I've been at this a long time. I'm married to my wonderful wife, Amy, for 34 years. I have 3 incredible children who are now all in their 20s. I love to play pickleball. I love to curl. I'm kind of hyper competitive. And I kind of like to think I'm pretty eternally optimistic.
Oh, I love that. An internal optimism.
And so men and depression has become kind of your life's passion. And we're going to talk a ton more about that. But before we get into it, what do you think is unique to the male experience of depression?
Well, first of all, I think the data you cited is completely underreported.
Likely.
Yeah. You know, the 6 million figure we'll talk about why I believe that. But I think what's so unique for men is that mental health professionals, medical professionals don't do a good job of talking to men about what their experiences are. Men don't have great language to explain what their experiences are.
Yeah.
For so many men, they grow up with no role models. Even in, stable 2-parent homes, dads, please, even though it's 2025, dads are a long way away from teaching their boys how to love, how to be kind, how to share, how to feel.
So you mean role models around emotional awareness and emotional expression.
Absolutely. There's a tremendous amount of unrecognized and undiagnosed physical and sexual abuse. The rates, just like depression in men, the rates of sexual abuse in boys is probably likely underreported by maybe as much as 30 to 40% in some of the data I've read. I can speak specifically to that, to a number of men at Face It who have revealed for the first time their history of sexual trauma. And these are guys in their 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
I think that, men to this, even as we speak, being vulnerable is an incredibly risky thing to be as a man. And if you can't be vulnerable, you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? And how many people are taught to be vulnerable?
Right.
Not many of us, men or women.
Well, men are taught to be stoic.
And maybe even knowing what that word means.
Right.
I think men may understand the sense of discomfort or inner tension or uncomfortable, but not taught what that means, what it is, certainly what to do about it. I think this is going to be a great discussion. I can't wait to have it. Right now, we're going to take a short commercial break, but stay tuned for more discussion with Mark on men and all things depression. We're covering a lot today. Thank you for listening to Feels Out Loud. We're going to be back in just a moment.
You don't never need help from nobody else. All you got to do now.
Welcome back to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. I am Tara Martini with the dear Becky McNatten. So let's dive right back into depression for men and more about what Mark Meyer has done to address this.
Mark, a few weeks ago, we talked about men not having emotion modeled for them. And you mentioned this just in our last segment. What do you think is the link? Say more about this link between emotional expression, and let's be honest, lack of, when I say that, for men and the experiences of depression.
So there's a, there's a condition called alexithymia, which is the inability to put words to emotions. To face it, we use emotion wheels. We've got the ones with, 75, 80 emotions on it. And most men, the range of emotions they can describe is very limited. And why? I think, Tara, you mentioned it earlier, guys are stoic. Guys are taught to keep things to themselves. Guys live with tremendous amount of shame when it comes to expressing their needs. Guys don't know how to ask for their needs. And so I think this inability to express your emotions is I don't have any words for it.
Right.
And honestly, I think that's why so many men struggle with therapy, because a therapist who's not acutely aware that a guy doesn't have words for what you may or may not be trying to describe or help him figure out, he gets frustrated, he gets angry. And I think a lot of men, we can talk more about this. I mean, I think a lot of men, how they express their emotion is rage and anger. And we know that. And so, when you think about diagnosing depression and you talk about, one of two symptoms and, one being sad or feeling down, most men don't endorse that feeling. They don't talk about, men don't talk about being sad. Men talk about anger. And then when you work with them, you get to the grief and the sadness and the loneliness and the isolation. But I don't think guys are socialized to talk about their emotions. They don't have the language.
So the sadness and those emotions are the hidden emotions. And what we're seeing up front is the anger.
Right. And men are so reckless in their behavior. And I think that's why, you go back to, guys are easy to dismiss when they're depressed and acting out in a million different ways, because what you see is their behavior. You see their caustic approach to people and life and, their reckless choices. And so we end up, pathologizing them in the criminal justice system. I bet you there's a whole bunch of men who are incarcerated with major depression. That's never, ever, ever been looked at.
Wow.
And I think that's, we celebrate that in men still to this day, the tough guy and the, I was thinking about this as I was driving over. It's, it's big sports time. It's playoffs for basketball and hockey. And there's all sorts of guys seeing all these role models of these guys screaming and yelling and carrying on. And it's kind of what guys see.
Yeah.
Well, because they see the yelling and the screaming, and that equates to love and passion.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
For that sport.
Yeah.
But then it translates to other things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the sort of undiagnosed, or that men don't necessarily endorse the symptoms of what in the clinical world we would say equates to depression.
Right.
Men are diagnosed at about half the rate of women with depression. And so say more. Why do you think this?
Well, I think we're asking the wrong question. So if you have to endorse one of two, either loss of interest in activities or feeling down.
Yes.
And one of them, you don't even understand what the question is regarding, do you feel sad? Do you feel hopeless? And the other one, most guys will dismiss lack of interest in activities because that's life. I got busy, kids were born, I got a job.
Yeah.
So they don't even recognize that, well, that's a thing. So there's been a long standing debate about, is there a male depression? And, in Europe, they do a much better job diagnosing and screening. They use the Gotland scale for male depression, which looks at reckless behaviors. It looks at rage. It looks at, have you been suspended from work? And it gets at this notion of anger. The University of Michigan, probably 12 years ago, did a great big look back on medical records. And they looked at men and they looked at women. And what they did was, for guys who, they had some inclinations that perhaps these guys were depressed, but they think the diagnosis was missed. So they went back, they used the Gotland scale to kind of do a look back and see what they could find with rates of depression. And what they found was that the rate of depression in men is higher than in women, if you put in this anger piece.
If you put in the anger piece.
If you use and ask the right questions, like you said.
We don't ask the right questions.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, you mentioned Europe just now. A 2024 study in the UK, so this is really recent, found 77% of men endorsed symptoms of anxiety and depression. But so 77%.
So that's high.
Yeah,
that's
which
very
probably
higher than the 6 million we talked about in the US.
Which
right?
probably falls in line much more with what you're thinking around what actually is.
Right.
But 40% said they had never spoken to someone about their mental health. 40%. And when they said anyone, they'd never spoken to another person, not a professional. This was just another person about their feelings. Never. That same study showed that 29% of men were too embarrassed to seek out any help at all. So 30% of that 77% were too embarrassed to seek out any help at all. And 40% of men said it would take feeling suicidal to reach out to anyone. I was not surprised by reading these statistics and also deeply saddened.
Yes.
By the reality that I'm not sure that men even who were filling out this survey for the study even knew, if 40% said they'd never talked to someone about their emotional well-being, that they even knew they had the anxiety and depression symptoms. They didn't know what they were even endorsing. What would you say about all of those statistics?
Well, I think it goes back to something we talked about initially, which is you're asking somebody to say that they're depressed, they're this or that, from an emotional standpoint. And again, most men don't. You just sort of a lot of guys just come to accept that they're unhappy, that they're miserable, that this is just the way it is. They don't necessarily discern that it's depression or it's anxiety. I think those numbers are probably inflated. I bet guys just said, yeah, I do talk to somebody to answer that. I mean, the survey.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
And that's in the UK, where they actually do a far better job of talking about depression. There's lots of national men's movements. There's actually a number of peer support organizations in the UK. They do a far better job treating depression, in my opinion, in the UK. When a person presents, it's not immediate antidepressant. They try some CBT. They have access to online tools. So I think they even do a better job. But I mean, guys don't seek medical help. They don't go see their primary care provider, let alone talk about their mental health, their needs. And again, I think there's still such strong messaging. My experience with guys, there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing, I need to just get over this. I need to just move on. Who am I going to talk to? What am I even asking for?
Yeah.
They have both of their hands tied behind their back when we talk about this perception of why won't you get help? They don't even know what they're getting help for.
Right.
Well, and how can you even do any of the things you just said if you can't identify how you feel?
Right.
It keeps going back. It's back to that diagnosis you said of how many men don't have the words, I feel a certain way, but I don't know how to put that in words.
Right.
Right.
And I think out of that comes all sorts of problematic behaviors like, affairs and alcoholism and porn addictions and sex addictions. And I mean, I think men sort of in this ugly, dark place of feeling miserable. They certainly know they feel miserable, but maybe don't put words to it. Then they don't ask for help. They act out to make those feelings go away.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, just think of the impact it would have not only on the gentleman himself, but on marriage, on their relationships, with just so many different, on every facet of their life. And then, unfortunately, what they discover in the end is all those things they tried don't work, right, to make them feel better. So they're still stuck feeling like, I don't know what this emotion is. I still feel this way. But they've never been taught then to go seek help or learn to identify.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me put myself in their place. It's I'm 58 years old. I was 35 years old when I made a very serious suicide attempt. I had my master's degree in social work. I had worked I knew exactly what was wrong with me, but I wasn't going to ask for help. Still in my head were those voices of try harder, get over it, knock it off, don't burden people.
Yeah.
Despite a wife, 3 kids, a great job, those voices are powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
And even as you mentioned, Mark, with your own experience, you had a language and an awareness of when you say you knew exactly what was going on, the inner turmoil around even having a way to describe it or be able to place it, how powerful those voices are and that messaging around don't ask for help.
No, I think it was that power of shame, just that notion that how dare you not be able to figure this out?
Yeah. Well, so you're highlighting what in the mental health world we kind of call stigma.
Right.
Say more. How is that experience for men? You share the word shame, but say more about men who are feeling depressed or experiencing depression, what that stigma is.
And what I think stigma's alive and well. Although I've been doing this a long time, we have made tremendous progress in this around men. Absolutely. In the 15 years I've been running Face It, I absolutely have seen improvements. I think of stigma for me, and I think of men, I think of shame. And I think it's more an internal narrative around I can't ask for help. Let me give you a little example. There's, thousands of men I've met in our groups over the years. And one of the things I love doing with guys is, they'll say, I've got nobody. I can't talk to anybody. I can't talk to anybody. And eventually you kind of pin them down and say, okay, there's somebody. And we get to who that person is. Are you willing to share? They'll go. And I kid you not, outside of one time, the guy came back and said, yeah, I told the guy. And the guy said, yeah, I struggle too. So it's this internal narrative.
Yeah.
I have an example of a guy who was he coached a high level professional men's softball team. And this particular individual, it's the guy I run Face It with. When word got out that he was doing Face It, he starts getting all these notes and emails and texts from guys who played softball. I'm suicidal. I'm abusing drugs. I'm cheating on my girlfriend. All these guys can't tell anyone. One day he comes into my office. He puts 9 names on a piece of paper and says, you know what these 9 names have in common? And I said, I don't. And he said, well, they're all softball players who have all expressed significant depression issues. Can't talk to anyone. I said, well, that's not particularly unique. He goes, they're all on the same team. They sit on the same bench.
On the same bench.
They suffer with the same problems and they can't talk about it with each other. There is such a strong, powerful culture that exists around the perceived or otherwise real danger of making yourself vulnerable in the male culture that's still alive.
Even to
So
people
strong.
who you know so well, people
Right.
who you see every day.
Right.
That
Who you would give the shirt off from your back, but how dare you ask for help? I mean, I
Right.
think that's a big part of it. And there's a lot of data around men and seeking help, particularly in therapy. One of the reasons guys don't like therapy is because they can't give anything back. Guys don't like to just take.
they don't like to take.
They want to give back. Therapy is a one-way street, right? You're not there to
Right.
get anything from your therapist. And so men often won't enter into a helping relationship if there's no reciprocity.
I've
Big time.
never thought of
That
that.
makes so much sense
And
to me.
it's huge.
It makes so much sense to me. Well,
Mm.
you mentioned that feels like one barrier. What would you say are some other barriers that men face in seeking out mental health care?
I think we've talked a lot around socialization. I mean, if you think about the experience of going to see a therapist, and let's go back, if our premises are accurate, that guys don't have the language, they don't want to feel vulnerable, they don't really know how to talk about this, and now you're going to lock them behind a door for 50 minutes.
Right.
And
With somebody
to
who's
just-
looking just at them.
Yes, exactly.
well, and I don't want to get too deep into the gender issues, but the reality is the vast majority of therapists are women.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And
Yes.
that dynamic right
Oh,
there,
yes.
I could regale you with hours upon hours of stories of what men have related about why they can't relate to women. And I mean, it again, I don't want to make these wicked, wild generalizations, but it's a challenging relationship to expect a guy to sit down and therapy is inside oriented, right? We want guys. It's kind of like you coming to me. I speak Chinese and you want to learn Chinese and you look at me and you say, okay, let's go. And I say, well, say something. We don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
This is the experience. This is what I want to scream out loud to the therapy community. This is the experience men are having. You sit down with them and they are overwhelmed. A lot of them, they're compelled, face of divorce or a job.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not there under their own,
Well, right.
Right.
so they're already on edge. And this
Mhm.
experience is it's complicated for guys.
Mm.
And they, guys have bad perceptions and, they think, oh, I'm just paying you to, tell me what I want to hear. And,
Right.
and I think one of the great things, I know we'll talk about Face It. One of the great things about Face It is that these guys over time begin to understand what therapy is.
Mm.
A lot of men walk into therapy for that first time. You know what they're looking for? A friend.
Mm.
You're
I
not
totally believe
there.
that.
You're not there to be their friend, but that's what
Mm.
they're looking for is a
Mhm.
friend.
Mhm.
And then
The kind of companionship.
exactly.
Well,
Mhm.
you mentioned this, what it feels like is the mental health realm getting it wrong for
Right.
men. like missing something. I just read recently, which was startling to me, that 60% men are more likely to die by suicide than women. We talked about that a few weeks ago, but 60% of men who die by suicide had sought care within the previous year.
Yeah.
So that's a startling outcome for people who actually had been in mental health treatment. And so it says to me that something is fundamentally missing in treatment for depression, in how we work with men, in what the dynamic is. You mentioned some of the things that are set up even in the way that there's not a reciprocity.
Right.
But what would you say is missing?
I mean, I think it's a lot of things. I mean, I've even read data, a high percentage of people who die by suicide actually saw somebody within the 30 days of their death, whether it was a medical or a mental health professional. You know, I mean, I can speak anecdotally to my experience with a suicide attempt. Nobody was going to know. So there's that. People who die by suicide often make this decision, and there are no telltale signs. There are no things that we saw coming, you know, so there's that piece of it. I think that, you know, a lot of men, I mean, I think the obvious things are access to fire. You know, men die by suicide at a great rate because they use more lethal means.
Right.
And, you know, we've shown that, particularly in the primary care setting, when physicians ask and you know, get guns removed from homes, that saves lives. But I think, you know, I mean, I think that, again, I can only go back particularly to my experience. And certainly I've lost men to suicide at Face It who, you know, I didn't see it coming. But, you know, my experience was I wasn't going to tell anybody. I had made up my mind. This choice was made. This decision was done. And I could have sat with the world's greatest therapist. Yeah. And maybe, you know, we can all anecdotally look back and say maybe. But I think guys just don't talk about it when it's really prevalent. I think, you know, men die by suicide for a lot of reasons, and it's not just depression. I mean, a lot of guys make really bad life choices that catch up with them, and they don't see a way out of that. Yeah. And so, you know, there's a lot of different reasons, and it's not the therapist's fault. It's not the medical professional's fault. It's just we don't do a good enough job on the front end. So by the time a guy gets to you at that point, it may be too late.
Right. Right.
Well, and you talk about men maybe walking into a therapy office looking for something that they're not sure what they're looking for. They don't have a language to say that. And it would be vulnerable to say to somebody in a first meeting, I'm actually looking for a friend. Right. Or I'm looking for some kind of companionship or partnership in pain. That would be odd to say. In the clinical setting that I sit in, we hear frequently things like, I've learned to live with it. I don't want to admit I need support. Often, I don't want to be a burden to anyone else. Or
that shame piece.
Or I didn't know what to say, which I am certain you hear also on your side a lot. And part of what I so much am inspired by you around is because you've sought to actually do something different in shifting the way that we see mental health care. You are taking some of that data and you've said, then let's try to address one of the pieces of what's missing. And to that spot of, we don't necessarily, you don't know what you're looking for, we're going to hand you something. Or if we think that you might be looking for companionship, let's hand that to you. And you started a whole organization called Face It that I want the whole world to hear about. So tell us about that.
So Face It's a peer support organization that I launched 15 years ago. And, you know, it's grown from an idea to 24 men's groups. We just actually launched one in Duluth that took me about 8 days to fill.
Wow. That's so telling.
Yeah, we have 200 and probably 40 some guys that come to our groups consistently and regularly. Everything we do is free. We own a retreat center. We have classes. We do activities. We actually have a peer support trauma program that's been very, very successful. You know, therapy has a tremendous amount to offer men. We spend the time getting them ready to go to therapy by just connecting with people and being in peer groups and learning how to talk about their emotions and talk about their behaviors. And, you know, there's a level of accountability that gets created in these groups that a lot of men need. A lot of men need.
So when you say peer support, what you're saying is this is people who are not therapists.
Exactly.
who are facilitating a group. For our listeners who are like, I've never heard of what peer support
Right.
is. It's somebody who says, I've experienced depression. I'm willing to facilitate a group of men who might be experiencing the same thing, and we're going to talk together.
Right. I have 39 facilitators, 2 of which are therapists. The other are just guys that had been in group forever and just said, hey, I want to step up. I want to help.
So cool.
They're not trained. They're not certified.
And they're volunteers.
And they're volunteers. And they volunteer. You know, you get in a FACEIT group. It meets every other week for 2 hours, you know, on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Sunday night. These guys make a huge commitment, but they wouldn't see it as volunteering. They would see it as just continuing on with this peer group and this community that they finally found. And these are doctors, lawyers, therapists, plumbers, pipe fitters. I mean, this is the entire spectrum of men that come to FACEIT. And it's, you know, peer support. I always tell people, because we don't charge for anything we do. We don't bill insurance. I tell people we sell friendship for free. That's
so beautiful.
That's all we do.
So beautiful.
I'm touched by that, because I think part of even what the paradigm that I align with as well is that if we could show up for one another as humans better, we would get through things more effectively.
Right.
We need people.
Right.
And we don't necessarily know how to ask for that, and also in the midst of painful experiences, we're not in a spot to go seek it. And I love the idea that peer support exists, because, as you mentioned, this concept of reciprocity, it allows men to feel like they're helping each other.
That's exactly what it is.
It's rooted into the philosophy of the organization that whether or not you're a facilitator in a peer support model, there may be an identified facilitator, but they're all co-facilitators in some ways, because it's not an ascribed curriculum. So they are all showing up to a collective to say to one another, I'm helping you with your experience.
Right.
Which is great, because it goes back to that reciprocity piece of they get that sense of ownership and helper mentality. It goes back to, I couldn't help but think about the last episode that we just spoke with someone who helps, a therapist who helps with transitions. And she said, with people who go through a transition, one of the things, you know, that can help so much is a byproduct of the transition is someone choosing then to go, where is there a hole? Where is there something missing? And then what can I do about it?
Right.
And what you did with your life experience was just that. You said, there is something missing in the healthcare system when it deals with men and depression. I am not going to just stand by and like witness it, but I'm going to do something about it. And here's FACEIT.
Yep.
And now you're watching this thing unfold that you've created, which is so incredible that you did that with, if we go back to the last episode, with the transition in your story.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I think anytime we have a trauma, if we can do something about it, we all do better.
Yes, we do.
Rather than just sitting in our trauma and doing nothing about it.
Yes, we do.
It creates some semblance of direction or
purpose,
meaning behind that. Yes, for ourselves. And I'm thinking that your whole philosophy around men and depression and working with it is probably different from when you started 15 years ago, what you heard as messaging around whether this would even be effective or would work.
Yeah. You know, when we first got going, I mean, the messaging was, you know, guys won't stick around, guys won't come, you can't possibly not charge. I mean, you hear all of these things. And, you know, it's so funny, when I kicked this organization off, I climbed on a bicycle in the backyard, literally, of the then chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Stanford University, and rode my bike across the country to, you know, give talks and kick this off. And one of the guys there, he was a development guy for Stanford. He said, you know, this isn't going to work. And I was like, wow, it would have been nice if you'd have told me that about 6 months ago. You know, and I mean, I told you out of the gate, there's probably nobody more competitive than me. And all you have
Thank goodness.
All you have to do
Thank
is
goodness.
tell me something that I think is a good idea won't work.
Yep.
And I'll show you.
Well, it sounds like someone else I know at this table.
Yeah. We get along pretty well sometimes. And you know, I think what came out of it now is literally hundreds upon hundreds of male friendships throughout the Minneapolis-St. Paul area that they have saved one another's lives. I mean, literally have saved one. I have guys who have gone to guys' houses and taken guns and driven them to the hospital. I mean, I can tell you many stories. And I think the beautiful thing about it for me, as I look back on it, is simply we created a community. And if you could show up and hang out at our office, you'd see guys hug each other. You'd see guys cry. You'd see guys, like I mentioned earlier, you'd see guys share stories of sexual trauma that has lived with them. And they've been in therapy and never quite found it to tell the therapist. And it comes out. They feel accepted. They don't feel judged. And not that you feel that way in therapy. That's not the point of this. It's just this particular community. These guys have been looking for this.
Yeah.
So and you created this.
Well, a lot of people created
so
this.
Say more, Mark, on, because Face It has this capacity to provide a sense of emotional safety and security for people to share. When you're leading the organization with somebody who was the softball team example of men who are right next to each other all day, how do you nurture that kind of culture that would bring men into the door when so many messages in society say, don't do that.
Right.
Don't be vulnerable with other men. How do you navigate that to get guys in the door to say, I'll go to group, I'll commit to that thing?
Well, guys are definitely more willingly coming forward now than they did 15 years ago. Guys are definitely younger. Guys are more in their 30s that are coming forward.
Okay.
But even back then, so, here's where you rely a little bit on the male culture. How do guys show love to each other? They give each other shit.
Right.
They joke. And so you get a guy in the door and, you be kind and you're gentle to start with. But with all due respect to my therapy training and some of the language we hear in therapy, we don't rely on some of that. We talk about, well, is it, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to swear. I mean, is it, you say things to guys like, well, this isn't working for you, is it? Or is it? What am I missing here? Or, you're
real.
You are very, I mean, whatever that means, yes, that's what I think we do. And I think that's what happens in groups, is that I think there is because the men are not, I love peer support specialists, but I think when you put people through that kind of training, you wring the humanity and some of the authenticity out of that. You now take their experience and you're trying to train them to sort of be mini mental health professionals, which I understand.
Yeah.
Right.
But because we don't do that, and our guys are supported and we're there for them, and I meet with them we do Zoom calls and all these things, but they're just being themselves.
Well, it's more authentic. Then.
Yeah. And they can say to a guy, yeah, I did that, or yeah, I've been there, or yeah, I had that message. That didn't, I mean, they're just very real.
Right.
The old line, you can't BS a BSer.
Right.
And that's how guys use this with each other, is they'll just say, yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah. Well, and these are open groups. So a person who's coming in and joining a group that exists is instantaneously getting modeling from guys who have been in the group.
That's a huge part of it.
Which is I can see that being one kind of a paradigm shift immediately in what would be totally new.
Mind blown.
Yeah. I'm so used to being in a spot where we don't talk about things. And all of a sudden I'm exposed to men who are sharing openly, which is so helpful that they're a brand new person is put next to a person who's in the same group that's been there for years.
Right. And that modeling piece, I've talked about that many times. I think that's so much. That's why I tell guys attendance is so important, because if you just show up, you're modeling that you matter for people.
Yes.
That we're there collectively.
Yeah.
And then when a guy shares, or a guy will cry, or a guy will be honest, or, whatever it might be, there's so much modeling, because that goes back to what we talked about initially. I've not met too many men who had much for modeling as children when it came to expressing emotions. And I'm talking about people who came from very solid homes, but they still didn't get it. It's just not a thing yet.
So if there's a man listening out there today and is struggling, what do you want to say to him?
Info@faceitfoundation.org will land in my box, or it will land in Bill's box, who I run the organization with, and we'll respond to him.
And say that again.
Info @faceitfoundation.org. And you should take a step. You should do something. And I'm not above using shame and shoulds, and because I can tell these guys, I can tell any guy that's listening right now that if you're struggling, it can get better. You think it can't. Look, I was committed to the hospital. I was there for 14 days under a court order, and never, thought I would never change and nothing would get better. And it did.
And here you
and
are.
I rebuilt my marriage. I rebuilt my relationship with my children. I mean, I rebuilt a lot of things, and it's hard work. And I know living with that level of misery, it's just not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So do something.
Well, and your statement just now makes me think about that earlier in the segment we were talking about. For 40% of men, they feel they would need to be suicidal in order to reach out for help. I hear you also saying it doesn't need to be to the spot
That's
where
the
you
point.
feel suicidal,
Right.
to connect with info@faceit.org.
Right.
Reach out, and it long before it gets to that. So if you are struggling and it is that, reach out.
Right.
Also, it doesn't need to get to that level of intensity in order for you to reach out.
Exactly. That's a great point. And I do think that that's what I'm saying we've seen over the 15 years is more and more men are reaching out before the crisis. And, you know, guys will show up, and we do have this comparison thing that always happens. Well, that guy was in the hospital, so therefore I'm not bad enough. I mean, we get that sort of conversations. And to your point, Becky, that's exactly the point. Your trauma, your background, your struggles, they're yours, and they're extremely real.
Yeah.
And I believe you ought to try to take a look at them and see what's out there and what you might learn about them.
Mm-hmm. Are there things that for people who are listening who might not be men, how can we support men's mental health?
You know, I think that, you know, affirming that their feelings are real. You know, I mean, you guys, you do this work. You know, people have a lot of feelings that are really hard to explain to people.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start explaining
feelings
them,
are complex.
and you start explaining them to people who don't get it, and you get the blank stare. I mean, you know, if you have any sort of level of shame or discomfort, you immediately internalize that, man, I must be messed up.
Right.
So I think you know, if you're supporting somebody who's struggling with a mental health issue, understand that this is real. It may not on the surface make a lot of sense, but it's very real for the person living with it. And these feelings they're feeling are extremely real. And we need to talk openly and kindly when people are willing to be vulnerable, because that's what this is boiling down to. If you ask a guy to be vulnerable and then you give him the old deer in the headlight look, that's a problem.
Well, yeah.
Don't ask for something you're not ready to receive and hear, which is some complex stuff that often follows when you talk about emotions.
Yeah, because there's going to be a hyper attunement or sensitivity to even noticing what the responses that someone else gives are. So if we show up with what would appear like a judgment or lack of ability to hold it.
Right. And, you know, a lot of men, I mean, like I said before, we could spend time talking about this. A lot of guys make bad choices and act out in ways that aren't particularly great. And so a lot of people who pursue them are really angry at, you know, or want to talk to them, but they're so angry at them for whatever it is the guy has done.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, you know, supporting a guy with a struggle, maybe it's not your job to take that on. Maybe there's somebody else who can talk to him, even if it is your husband or your boyfriend or your brother or your father or your uncle. You know, maybe there's somebody else who can approach him and just say, hey, it seems like things aren't great. What's going on? Anything?
Right. It's a good point, because sometimes, as you said, if men are externalizing depression, they can be hurtful.
Very, very hurtful. Very hurtful. I've met a lot of men, and you can probably put me in this category, who didn't make great choices, and, you know, wasn't, you know, I wasn't super high on people's list to care about, despite the challenges I was dealing with, because these external behaviors are they're very hurtful. Absolutely. And they're common, and they're very common.
I think you bring up such a good point about whether it is a partner or spouse, that it's not necessarily their role to be the one to have those talks, that it's okay to let go and say, that's not my role. And it may even be beneficial to the relationship to do so, to let go and say, there may be a better fit out there, whether that's a therapist or Face It group or a peer or a friend, but whoever it is, that it's okay if it's not your spouse or partner.
Right. And that's such a hard concept for we could talk about that.
Oh, for sure.
That's so hard for partners to let go of, right?
Yes. Oh, I'm not saying it's easy.
No, not at all. But I mean, I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. I mean, I've met so many men. They have relied on their partner to such a degree. They've wrung the intimacy out of it maybe forever.
Wow.
So much to think about.
Great point.
We're headed to commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to talk through listener questions about men and depression. Feels Out Loud will process your questions and thoughts in just a moment. We'll be right back.
You gotta find your people, then
We are back again with Feels Out Loud, and this is the part of the show where we talk through questions from our beautiful listeners. If you have a question related to mental wellness, sharing feelings, or topics for each week that you would like us to process through, please visit our website at becomingtogethermn.com and find the Feels Out Loud page to submit a question directly. Or you can certainly email us at contact@becomingtogethermn.com. We truly want to hear from you and want to know what you are wondering about.
Mark, we had a lot of listeners who had questions about men and depression, which I think would align with everything we've been saying in the show, that it's likely an underreported and underdiscussed thing. We have a listener who says the following, and I would love your responses to it. My brother is depressed. He is so lonely, so isolated, and I'm so worried about him, but he puts on a face like everything is perfect. I can tell he hides it, and he will sometimes tell me about it, but I think he has struggled his whole adult life. What can I do?
Keep talking to him. Keep loving him. Keep putting information in front of him. You know, I Face It has a podcast on our website, faceitfoundation.org. And it's one of the greatest ways to get men to listen or to hear.
Great idea.
Because our guests, 95% of our episodes, our guests are just guys in group.
Okay.
So they talk about their experiences. They talk about people who tried to help them, you know, how that went.
So their own personal journeys with life, depression,
all of
navigating it.
Yep. And I think that, I think for the guy, the hope is that eventually the guy hears her, his sister, and hears that she's concerned and she cares and she wants him to realize that there are things that can be done for him. Again, it's really hard to answer some of these questions without being too general. But I mean, if a guy has kids, I often go from that angle. You don't want to do it for yourself right now, do it for your kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't want to do it for you, do it for your partner or, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe take some of that pressure off from him to fix himself for himself, but to go to work on things to help those in his life. That's kind of that reciprocity thing, in my opinion.
Totally.
And so, you keep putting it in front of him. You let him know that just because his perception might be, a lot of guys perceive the only way to treat depression is with medication. Not true. Lots and lots and lots of ways to treat depression. Don't even have to treat it with just therapy.
Yeah.
Let people know they have options. Let people know that there are many different ways to begin to understand what you're going through and what to do with it.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point, because part of Face It, you treat depression with pickleball.
Right.
And taking trips to the retreat center up north.
Right.
That you believe in, I guess, fundamentally relationships and connection with other people. But there are a lot of ways to develop a relationship and connection to ourselves that don't involve medication.
Right. And I think that, medication serves its role. In my personal belief, after teaching for 5 years in the School of Medicine at the University of Minnesota, is we throw medication at every problem before we even know what it is. And, that's a lot of times guys I got a lot of guys who suffer from the diagnosis of a guilty conscience. There's no Prozac that will fix a guilty conscience, but that's the first thing we throw at it. And then a guy has a bad experience with it, or it doesn't do anything, and he wonders, well, why bother there? And I just think that this is not that medication doesn't have a role. It's just that there are a multitude of ways, but we've crafted a model that says medication and therapy. I mean, that is what the model is.
We have.
Yeah.
And it's inadequate, and it's certainly not comprehensive. And I mean, it's complicated. And I think people just need to know there's a lot of ways. And it's not just going for a walk. You can't just exercise your way out of this, in my opinion, either.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things.
Well, part of what I hear you saying is dialoguing with what is this shame voice,
right?
And recognizing it's a part of our inner dialogue, and not just seeking to suppress it or escape from it, but to embrace it, give it hugs and love
and space.
Yeah.
And to learn to be able to do that is one heck of a process, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely well said. We're at the end of our show for today. Thank you for listening, everyone, this morning, and join us next week as we talk about responsibilities of adulthood and the influence that day-to-day requirements have on mental wellness. In the week ahead, be kind to yourself. Remember that connection fosters wellness, and your voice is one the world around you needs to hear. Share yourselves, friends.
Some don't, some will, some won't. I wanna be